Okay, let's talk about 3-bet pots today. Gonna show 4 tips to crush 3-bet pots. So of course, there's a lot that goes into 3-bet pots. They're pretty complex, as is poker in general. But I thought simplifying it to 4 things to focus on could make it easier to learn. So yeah. Step 1. Step 1. Mash. There are a lot of situations where during these situations, basically the biggest mistake is not putting money in the middle. When you have a strong hand, then you want to mash the money in the middle. And that's especially the case in 3-bet pots compared to single raise pots. And the reason is because the stack to pot ratio is low enough where if you got a good hand, you just got to get it in. It doesn't mean open shoving the flop. It doesn't mean betting big on the flop and jamming turn, but getting some significant money into the middle is really important. And basically, there are multiple ways to get the money in. You can bet large, or you can bet medium, or you can bet small, or you can check raise, or you can do blah blah blah. There are many lines that you can take, depending on what your hand is, depending on what the flop is, depending on the ranges. Those things will determine, how much money you want to get in, and what lines you take to get that money in. So the bet sizing on the flop and turn determines the river strategy. So the more money we put in on the flop and turn, the more money we're likely to put in on future streets. So if we bet, half pot on the flop, half pot on the turn, on the river, it's a half pot river jam. So we're just going to be jamming or checking. Whereas if we say bet small on flop, bet small on turn, the stack to pot ratio is going to be 1 or a little bit above 1 or something. And so there's going to be less jamming. Not only because of the stack to pot ratio, but also the range that we do it with is different. So we use small sizings with thin value bets, and so it's just a lot of a decent amount of weak top pair or middle pair type hands. And then larger sizing. So in 3-bet pots, a large sizing is half pot or larger, whereas in a single raise pot, maybe a large bet would be 3/4 pot or larger or something like that. So for the larger sizings, we generally bet not as frequently, and we're repping value that wants to get all in. So basically over pairs or strong top pair, where regardless of the run out, the stack to pot ratio is low enough. We just want to bet a decent size and get all in on the turn or get all in on the river, even if an overcard comes out or something like that. Which I'll have an example of that on the next slide. But basically what you need to know is use small sizings when you're betting more of your middling value. Hands that are pretty decent, but they don't want to get all in. And use larger sizing, so either half pot or larger, or check raise to a decent size with strong value that basically just wants to get all in on almost every run out, or the vast majority of run outs. So I have an example here from Sim, and it's kind of loading. Okay. So King 6-5, flush draw. So like, okay, so just to look at the ranges. So this is big blind 3-bet versus button. So this is the big blind range, and this is the button range. So whatever. King high boards are just really good for the 3-better, and basically toward the top of the range, the pre-flop raiser has the advantage. So basically they're able to use multiple sizings, and what you see is, so for the smallest sizing, quarter pot, okay, it's a lot of top pair and pocket pair below top pair, queens, jacks, 10s, 9s. Once you size up to 35% pot, it's more top pair and less of the pocket pair below top pair. And once you go up to 3/4 pot, it's just a lot of, it's starting to have some the two pair and a lot of over pairs and top pair, and then none of the pocket pair below top pair. So what you see is that clearly these pocket pair below top pair hands, they're okay. They can value bet, but they're not the best hands ever. They have very little ability to improve against top pair. They generally don't want to get all in. And so you just bet small. And what ends up happening is you leave a lot of, you let in position call all their pairs, a lot of their ace highs, queen jack high, stuff like that, with backdoor flush draw type hands. Which means that these hands can keep value betting on the next street for small again. Whereas with our overpairs, we tend toward just going like 3/4 pot or whatever. Or in this case, 3/4 pot. And then we can keep shoveling in more money on the next street. So it's a strong but vulnerable hand. And so we just size up. It's okay if they fold some pocket pairs and more ace highs and stuff, kind of denying equity, but also getting value from a lot of the pairs as well. And the check range is contains a lot less top pair and a lot less of the pocket pair below top pair, and just a lot more unpaired hands. Specifically a lot more ace highs. And also like, so the ace highs are more likely to go large as well, basically flanking the overpairs and strong top pair. Because the ace highs block aces and ace king, and ace highs are, well, we'll talk about that on the next slide. So yeah, the main thing is on earlier streets, you basically decide how much money you want to get in. I mean, the same thing is true pre-flop too, because like for example, if you face an open, if you face a cutoff open and you're on the button, you can decide to call or 3-bet. Some hands prefer to call more so. Some hands prefer to 3-bet, and generally the hands that can 3-bet, or generally the hands that 3-bet more often are the ones that can put in more money post-flop. Whereas the hands that are calling, they can't put as much money in post-flop after 3-betting because they just don't have good equity or whatever robust equity, and so then they prefer to call. And the same thing is true post-flop, where like if you have a decent value hand that isn't like the best hand ever and doesn't want to get all in, you just use a small size or you check. Like there are other boards where like if it's not as good of a board as King 6-5 for the pre-flop raiser, then those like pocket pair below top pair hands, pocket pair below second pair hands, bottom pair type hands or whatever. A lot of the time, maybe not bottom pair, but yeah, like say like ace king high or something like that. Then those hands would prefer checking more often, but yeah, and then like the overpairs and stuff like that, as well as like the strongest bluffs, they prefer to go larger. So we mash the money in the middle with small sizes just by using a lot of small sizes. on certain other boards, you just range bet quarter pot or whatever. So we mash the money in the middle by putting in a lot of bets. They're small bets, but it's a lot of bets. And then we mash with larger sizes by basically trying to get all in. Yeah. Okay, and bet frequency is based on how each player's draws complete. So, regardless of what position the pre-flop raiser is in, generally their bluffs, their pre-flop 3-bet bluffs are high cards. And the main difference is the pre-flop caller's position. So when the pre-flop caller is in like the low jack or high jack, then most of their calls are mid to low pocket pairs, and the reason for that is that basically the high card hands don't have enough equity or like enough ability to improve against the 3-better's range, and so then they just call a really pocket pair heavy range, which they can hit sets. Whereas like in late position, then once ranges start getting wider, then the pre-flop caller can start calling a lot more suited hands. Especially like after they open on the button or a small blind, they can just start calling a bunch more suited hands. And so basically knowing this, then it's going to have a big impact on bet frequency. So when the pre-flop caller is in early position, then basically the pre-flop raiser does really well on higher card boards and does worse on the lower boards. The lower boards improve the pre-flop caller to a lot more sets and bricks the pre-flop raiser's bluffs, whereas the high card boards improve the pre-flop raiser's bluffs. On the other hand, when the pre-flop caller is late position, then a big chunk of both ranges are going to be high cards. So basically what the specific board and the ranges are, they matter a lot. So an example of this. Okay. So basically I took out the pairs and just looking at the unpaired hands. So like here, this situation is big blind 3-bet versus small blind. So this is the small blind call of 3-bet range, and this is the big blind 3-bet range. So the big blind, because they're closing the action, they can 3-bet polar, they can 3-bet a lot more bluffs and weak bluffs. So clearly they have a lot of these crappy offsuit hands, 10x suited, very weak hands. Whereas the caller of the 3-bet is like mostly like suited broadways, strong offsuit broadways, 9x suited, and suited connectors. So like clearly they have a stronger range. Like on a 3-3-2 board, basically a brick board, then the equities are close to even. Like the pre-flop raiser, the big blind 3-better, has a 51% equity. So even though they 3-bet pre, then their bluffs or like their unpaired hands are only slightly stronger than the pre-flop caller's unpaired hands. And the only reason for that is like, because they have ace king and ace queen a lot more than the pre-flop caller has. But then they also have all these weaker bluffs. So, yeah. And then like if you compare it to cutoff 3-bet versus hijack. So this is the hijack call range of the 3-bet, like the unpaired hands. And this is the cutoff 3-bet range. So clearly the cutoff 3-bet range, because they have the button behind, small blind behind, and big blind behind, where like if they cut off 3-bets, they can still face a cold 4-bet from 3 players. Then their bluffs are a lot stronger than the hijack calls with. So the hijack gets a good price because the 3-bet's pretty small, so they can call with a lot of suited connectors. But the cutoff 3-bet range is just strong. And so what ends up happening is that, the cutoff has a 56% equity, or the cutoff's unpaired hands have 56% equity. And yeah, so basically the reason why we're just looking at unpaired hands is because regardless of the situation, basically the preflop raiser's pairs are always going to be stronger, because the preflop caller would just 4-bet a lot of their strong pairs. So basically, like the big blind can 3-bet weaker because they don't have to fear a cold 4-bet. So what ends up happening is that, that was actually the second one was actually button 3-bet versus cutoff, but whatever. Basically the same type of thing. The buttons unpaired hands are considerably stronger than the cutoffs unpaired hands, therefore they can just bet really often. 80% frequency betting. Big blind 3-bet versus small blind, the bluffs are about even, or like the unpaired hands are about even in equity, meaning that the big blind can't c-bet all that often. Only 59% c-betting. And what you see is that the button 3-better can c-bet with a lot of small sizings, a lot more small sizings, whereas like the big blind 3-better just goes more polar, more toward like 35 to 50% pot. So basically, like when a player's, like if somebody has stronger unpaired hands pre-flop, then they can just, or when the pre-flop raisers unpaired hands are a lot stronger, then they can just c-bet a lot more, and that includes more small betting. So to go back to this bet sizing on flop part, basically the small betting comes when we're thin value betting, but also we can thin value bet more when we have more strong hands. Whereas, so if we have a small bet or check strategy, then usually we're doing pretty well on that board. Whereas if we're not doing as well, then usually it's like check or large bet. I mean, there are exceptions and stuff, but yeah. So, we want to mash the money in the middle, but we want to mash the money in the middle in a way that makes sense. So if we're at a big advantage across the range, we're going to use a lot of small sizings. Get thin value, get value from some of their weak hands and stuff. Whereas, if we're not as big of an advantage, or if we have a hand that wants to get all in, we size up. And by sizing up, we get we get more of their like middling showdown value hands to fold, but we also get more value from the hands that do call. So just always mash, but you just have to figure out what the best way to mash the money in the middle, basically. Yeah. Oh yeah, and also like this small sizing when thin value betting, large sizing when wanting to get all in. It's a little bit different if it was a single raise pot with higher stack to pot ratio, because basically like there are less hands that want to get all in a single raise pot, and so this delineation between small sizes and large sizes, it doesn't hold in single raise pots as much, but this does hold in 4-bet pots though, for sure, because the stack to pot ratio is also low there. So mash the money in the middle. What can I say? If you have an overpair, if you have a good overpair, get all in. That's heavily simplified, but it's kind of true. Okay. And to kind of continue what we're talking about on this slide, basically we want to stack off wider at low stack to pot ratio. That's where the mashing comes in, or mashing with large sizes. Basically, you just can't afford to not get all in with your strong value on boards where your opponent has decent equity against your hand or whatever. So, if you can bet and force your opponent to be in a tough spot with like when they have like a hand that has like 25 or 35% equity, it doesn't seem like that much equity, but essentially it's enough equity where we want to deny that equity. And so, like, stacking off wider. Yeah, the stack to buy ratio is lower. Your threshold for getting all in is lower. If the stack to buy ratio was like 17 or whatever for a single raise pot, or 19 or whatever the stack to buy ratio is, there are just a lot less hands that want to get all in. But in a 3-bet pot, it's like you can just get all in a lot later. Wait. Yeah, so sometimes we value jam hands that have like 40 to 60% equity on the river when the stack to buy ratio is 0.5. Yeah, if the stack to buy ratio was higher, then we would just try to bet bet small or try to check it down. So an example is 7-3-2. So this is big blind 3-bet versus button. Is it? Wait, what is it? Small blind 3-bet versus button, right? This is the small blind 3-bet range. This is the button 3-bet button call range. And so if the small blind bets 3/4 pot, what did we say? King, jack, and then king. So it bets 3/4 pot with like overpairs, basically. Mashing the money in because to deny the equity from like high cards and stuff. Okay, jack turn. Barrel half pot, and on a king river, guess what? We're basically jamming deck, but not quite. Like the ace highs are checking down, but like, even like pocket eights is so-called value jamming. Like 55% equity, 56% equity, just jamming it in, and stuff like that, and and then basically because the stack to buy ratio is so low, stack to buy ratio is 0.33. So you basically just have to get it in a lot lighter. If you see these hands that are calling, like pocket fives is pure calling, but it only has 20% equity. 20%, 23%. Okay, some of the like 10s and 9s are stronger, but or like ace highs, they're mixing calls and 20% equity. So basically, you just have to get in real light at lower stack to buy ratio. Not on every board, but yeah, I mean, like, if you got all in with pocket eights in a single raise pot on 7-3-2 jack king, it would just be such a huge punt, massive punt. But at lower stack to buy ratio, then you just get it in. I mean, not on every run out, but you just have to get it in a lot later, basically, as the better and as the person facing the bet, and also like as the preflop raiser or as the preflop caller. You just have to stack off wider, and if you don't, then you're basically just punting money. Because when people are jamming in pocket eights on the river on 7-3-2 jack king, then if you're folding your bluff catchers versus a 1/3 pot bet, then you're just handing them money. It just is a plus EV call with almost any pairs in that situation, for example. So yeah, just stack off wider at lower stack to buy ratio. Okay. Another thing is we want to bluff our weak showdown value. So in a single raise pot, these weak showdown value hands are going to be checking very frequently to try to get to showdown. So like ace highs and bottom pair and our pocket pair below second pair. But in a 3-bet pot, these hands just don't. They're showdown value hands as far as like they technically have equity, but they're not going to be able to get to showdown and win. And also, they're just good bluffing hands to try to get better pairs to fold, or if you have ace high, you try to get better ace highs to fold, or get their weak pairs to fold. And if you have a weak pair, you try to get their other weak pairs to fold, or their middle pair hands to fold. So on in general, on most boards, our main bluffs are going to be ace highs, as well as our 2 Broadway hands. So king, queen, king, jack, king 10, queen, jack, queen 10, jack 10, stuff like that. Which on many boards they block top pair. And then on ace high boards we just bluff the weak pairs. Bottom pair, pocket pair below second pair, and sometimes even middle pair we bluff with, if we can get a significant amount of their top pair to fold. And then just like in any other situations, then our secondary bluffs are going to be like draws, weak pairs on non-ace high boards as well. Draws can bluff a decent amount, but basically the reason why they're not bluffing quite as much in 3-bet pots is that when we bet, there's a higher chance of us facing a jam because of the lows. Because both players can stack off wider at lower stack to pot ratio, they're going to be jamming on us when we bet, and so we don't want to bet fold the flush draw basically. So when we get jammed on often, then we just won't bluff our flush draws as much, basically. Yeah. We still do bluff them some, but not nearly as much. Okay, so an example. This is small blind 3-bet versus hijack. This is the small blind 3-bet range, hijack call range. So quarter pot is the main sizes. It is the main sizing, and basically bluffing the double Broadway hands and some weak pairs. Let's see, what was the ace 9 3 2 jack? So the main barrel size is 3/4 pot, and let's see, what are we barreling? We are barreling middle pair, weak pair, and some of these double Broadway hands and stuff. And on the jack river, jack non-flush river, our bluff jams are weak pairs. It's mainly middle pair, or 9x on this board, but generally weak pairs. And also another example, also small blind 3-bet versus hijack. 10-6-4, so a non-ace high board. So we bet 3/4 pot. 2-7, okay. Half pot turn. It's mainly ace highs. Also double Broadway hands. Oh, actually, okay. Yeah. Ace highs and double Broadway hands. And as you can see, okay, so we have 8% flush draws in our range, and we're betting 9% flush draws. So the flush draws aren't really preferred betting versus checking compared to our range. Okay, 7 river, a 7 non-flush river. Our bluffs are ace highs and the double Broadway hands. So basically you're bluffing your weak showdown value hands as well as top pair blockers. Yeah, so like, we can often bluff, or usually bluffing ace highs to fold out the weak pocket pairs on the flop or as the turn barrel. Because the pocket pairs don't want to face a bunch of bets because they just want to get to showdown. And so once they potentially face a jam, or, once they face a bet with the threat of a jam on the future street, then the pocket pairs are a weak bluff catcher. And so either they mix continue or they just pure fold. Whereas, for example, if we're on the river and the flop and turn check through, basically we can't get their pocket pairs to fold anymore because they only have to call one bet to get to showdown. And the ranges are weaker. So basically we don't bluff with the ace highs anymore. So if we happen to check down with ace high and now we're on the river, then oftentimes we're not going to be bluffing all of our ace highs anymore. So the reason we bluff the weak showdown value is not only because we don't have that much equity, but also we are on the flop. We're on an early street and it's going to be hard to get to showdown and win. And also we can force fold from their equivalent hands or their slightly better hands. Whereas like if we're on the river, then if we have 20% equity, then that's enough equity to try to check down and hopefully win against their worst showdown value hand or whatever. Okay. And last and final one. Didn't expect this video to be so long. Continue bluff catchers based on bet sizing and position. So a bluff catcher is a hand that loses to our opponent's value but beats their bluffs. And so like these are the main important factors. Okay, so ace 8-3. Wait. Oh, 9-3-2, sorry. Okay. Okay, so this is big blind three rivers hijack. This is the big blind three bet range, and this is the hijack call range. So, for example, there are two bet sizings that the big blind three better is using: half pot and 3/4 pot. And so, the number one way of, or like one of the two main factors with bluff catching is the bet sizing. So if we face a half pot bet and we're in position, guess what? We continue all of our pocket pair below top pair. Not all, 93%. So it's not a huge bet, and it means that we're not going to face as many jams by the river. Given that they could also bet 3/4 pot. They would have more overpairs if they bet 3/4 pot. So we can bluff catch pretty effectively, or like pretty decently, with a pocket pair below top pair, facing a half pot bet. Whereas if they size up to 3/4 pot, now they have a lot more overpairs in their range. They're going to get all in by the river more often, which sucks for our bluff catchers. Which means that our bluff catchers are just going to want to fold more, because of our pot odds, but also because they're repping a stronger range. So now all of a sudden our pocket pairs are folding 56% of the time instead of only folding 6%. So that's quite a huge difference. It's usually not that big of a difference, but yeah, even our pocket tens are starting to fold because their main value range at this point after 3/4 pot bet is aces, kings, queens, jacks, basically hands that beat our pocket tens. Whereas for like half pot, well, it's basically the same thing, but we're basically just getting worse odds when not sure what's going on with my throat, but once we face a larger bet, we're just getting worse pot odds, basically. And so we just fold more of our bluff catchers. And also we can compare position, compare like big blind 3-bet versus hijack, and cutoff 3-bet versus hijack. So basically it's we face a half pot c-bet when we're the in position pre-flop caller versus when we're the out of position pre-flop caller, and see the continuing frequencies versus a bet. So this is the whatever big blind 3-bet versus hijack. So we're in position here facing a half pot bet. In position pre-flop caller facing a half pot bet. We fold like 35% of the time. And so we're continuing half of our pocket pair below top pair. So 35% folds. We're slightly over folding compared to MDF. Barely though, like 1.3% overfold. But now all of a sudden, wait, hold on. We're supposed to be looking at quarter pot, sorry. So facing quarter pot bet, we're only folding 19%, so we're actually slightly under folding compared to MDF. Not that that specific thing matters, but basically just 19% folding. And we're only folding 15% of our pocket pair below top pair. So being in position, we can bluff catch pretty decently, because we're in position and, facing a small bet. But if we're out of position facing a small bet, now all of a sudden we have to fold 43% of the time. And our pocket pair below top pair, even though these pocket pair below top pair hands are slightly stronger than in the other situation, then we're folding decently more often with these bluff catchers, as well as like the low pocket pairs too. So essentially just like, if you're out of position, you have to fold a lot more. You just can't bluff catch very effectively when you're out of position on an early street, because you just can't dictate the action. Whereas if you're in position, then you often on the next street get a chance to check back. And you can bluff catch more effectively as in position on the next streets as well. And as far as bet sizing, the larger the bet sizing, the more bluff catchers are going to fold. And the smaller the bet sizing, the more your bluff catchers can continue. So the 4 principles: mash. You just want to mash the money in the middle in the most efficient way possible. Could mean a lot of small bets. It could mean large bets, but less frequently. Basically saying, hey, I'm going to get all in. Do you really want to call with your bluff catcher? And, make their bluff catchers just totally indifferent. Large bets either just like half pot flop or 3/4 pot flop or check raising flop. We can stack off wider at lower stack to pot ratio. We want to bluff our weak showdown value hands to get their stronger showdown value hands to fold. And we can continue our bluff catchers based on the bet sizing and whether we're in position or out of position. So that's 4 tips for 3-bet pots. It was certainly probably longer than it needed to be, but yeah. Hope you enjoyed, and if you did and you're still watching, then leave a comment, say what you think of it. If you thought it sucked, cool, tell me. If you thought that you enjoyed it or got something out of it, then let me know in the comments. Like the video if you want to. I don't know what you're supposed to say, but yeah. hope you enjoyed, and this has been another video with Psychic Bank.